Thank you. Well, Your Eminence, Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, the question what can Muslims learn from Nostra Aetate is very critical and sensitive issue to deal with. But before answering or trying to answer this question, it is useful to answer two more preliminary questions. First, what is wrong with the Islamic world or in the Islamic world that Muslims have to learn from others? The second question is, what is exceptionally right in Nostra Aetate that Muslims can learn from it? The two questions are interconnected. On the one hand, 1/3 of the 1.6 billion Muslims, that is about 600 million of them, live in non-Islamic countries and non-Islamic societies. And 2/3 of the 2.2 billion Christians live in the third world, Africa and Asia, where Islam is, besides South America. This physical interconnectedness implies the necessity for a mutual acceptance, respect, and cooperation. The main gate for this is a mutual understanding. Nostra Aetate in itself is a main spring, main source for this understanding, as I will show later. Ladies and gentlemen, one doesn't need a lot of moral courage to admit that, yes, there is something wrong in the Islamic world. This world, Islamic world, is very rich in natural resources, yet its people are very poor and very unsettled. The highest percentage of refugees and displaced in the world are Muslims. Tensions are high with Muslims of different confessions, Sunni and Shia, and between others. Also between Muslims and non-Muslims, Muslims and Hindus in India, Sri Lanka, Muslims and Buddhists in China, Thailand, and Myanmar, Muslims and Christian Orthodox in Russia, Muslims and Christian Catholics in Europe and other places, certainly, Muslims and Christian Protestants in the USA, UK, others, Muslims and Jews in Israel and beyond, Muslims and other different believers, the Yazidis and others. All these negative features require a courageous reconsideration and re-evaluation of the current situation in the Islamic world. The process of reconciliation requires, first of all, the admission, even the confession, that there is a major problem, that it is not true that others are responsible for that problem, that Muslims themselves are responsible, that it is not useful anymore to avoid self-criticism and seek refuge under the umbrella of a foreign conspiracy theory against Islam, but to blame ourselves as Muslims in the first place. We Muslims have to admit that we are facing a real existential problem. The right of definition of this problem or any other problem is half the way to solve it, as the English sociologist Huxley put it decades ago. Now the question is, who has the legitimate authority to define the problem, and who has the wisdom to outline the solution, and who has the courage to admit that Muslims should learn from other constructive experiences like Nostra Aetate. Now, before talking about Nostra Aetate and what and how to learn from it, let me tell you a short story of a great man who made history. The man is Angelo Roncalli. Angelo was a soldier in the Italian army during the First World War. In the battlefield, he saw and lived how millions were killed by all means, by every means, even by poisonous gas. He was shocked and got sick. After the war, he joined the clergy to find spiritual refuge and was appointed to the Vatican embassy, first in Greece, then in Bulgaria, where he was acquainted with Christian orthodoxy. Then in Ankara, Turkey, where he was introduced to Muslims. After World War II, he became bishop and appointed nuncio, ambassador, to France, where communism, secularism, and left movements were at that time at its peak. In 1958, 28 October, now Cardinal, Roncalli was elected Pope. He got the name John the 23rd. He carried with him to the papacy his experiences, all the experiences I talked about, and encounters both in war, the two world wars, and peace. In 1959, 25th January, and for the first time in the history of the Vatican, he addressed a message to the United Nations, that is, to all nations of different religions, cultures, and ethnicities, in which he said, and I quote, "Peace on earth is an object of profound desire for humanity." He confirmed in his message on 4 principles in order to achieve peace for humanity: truth, justice, solidarity, and liberty. These principles are the principles that we should learn from. At that time, the Catholic Church was considering communism as anti-Christian. Pope Pacelli was behind that declaration. But Pope John XXIII himself received in the Holy See the son-in-law of the Soviet president at that time, Nikita Khrushchev. This is a very short story of the Pope who called for the Vatican II, but who passed away 3rd of June 1963, 2 years before Vatican II was concluded or concluded its meetings, which were culminated by Nostra Aetate in 18 December 1965. With the participation of 2,450 bishops from all over the world. Nostra Aetate now canceled and turned the page on almost all previous religious laws against the bishops of Constantinople, which led in 1045 to the great divide between the two churches, Rome and Constantinople. Sunni and Shia can learn from this lesson. Nostra Aetate reconciled with the evangelical and Orthodox churches the ecumenical dialogue. Here again, Muslims can learn to open up to other Islamic schools of thought. Nostra Aetate opened the door of the church to the secularist Christians to participate in its activities. Now Pope Francis is opening more doors. Islam can learn from this also. Nostra Aetate withdrew the church's old verdict that condemns all the Jews until the end of time for the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. It is like a Magna Carta of Christian-Jewish relations, which we can learn from also. Nostra Aetate declared that Muslims are believers in one God, and that Muslims respect Jesus and his mother, Virgin Mary. Though they don't believe in him as God, they do believe that he is a prophet. This is the verbal text I'm quoting. That they believe in the day after, which God will judge between all peoples. That they worship God, especially by prayer, charity, and fasting. And hence, and this is very important, differences with them is a sin. Nostra Aetate declares. After Vatican II, and on the basis of these new Christian principles stated in Nostra Aetate, popes John VI, John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and Francis addressed Muslims as brothers. These are the lessons that Muslims in the 21st century are supposed to learn from. But we cannot, as Muslims, we cannot learn if we don't realize that we need to learn. And we cannot realize the need to learn if we do not feel that we are wrong somewhere. And we cannot have the feeling of being wrong if we are not courageous enough to practice self-criticism. After that, we should be exceptionally courageous to admit that we have to learn from other experiences, even if that other is an outsider to our spiritual and doctrinal system. Now, contrary to what extremists like ISIS are doing in the Middle East, and to the Middle East, Christians are described in the Holy Quran as believers in God. I hope by this I answered the question of the first session here. And Islam believes that they are nearest to Muslims. Their clergy are praised in the Quran for being humble, though in principle there is no clergy in Islam itself. As Prophet Muhammad clearly declared. That's why there is no religious state in Islam. There is no religious state in Islam run by the clergy who are not there or who are supposed not to be there in the first place. I'm almost finished. Now, for us Muslims, to follow the example of Vatican II as stated in Nostra Aetate, we need a religious leader with the qualifications of Pope John XXIII, who believes in humanity as one family and who respects and believes in all religions. I am sure, I'm confident that we have many, simply because this is exactly what Islam teaches. After all, to be a Muslim is to believe in all messages from God and in all his messengers, those who are mentioned in the Quran and those who are not mentioned. To believe in Islam is to believe in human plurality and in human differences as manifestation of the glory of God. But to my humble knowledge, I don't know who has the moral and the religious authority that Pope John XXIII had to bring together 2,450 Muslim scholars and imams from all over the Islamic world and to convince them to keep their meetings and discussions until they come to a unified 21st century interpretation of Islamic principles that deal with contemporary human challenges. This is not to underestimate the many courageous attempts that Muslims have taken so far. Al-Azhar 4 documents about human liberty and the nation state, national state, the Mecca principles against extremism and terror, the Beirut Declaration on religious freedom, just to mention initiatives that I was part of and directly involved in as KAICIID board member. The question is how to bring together all these scattered initiatives to form a snowball and push it down the hill. The war against extremism and terrorism committed in the name of Islam is an Islamic war because it is an Islamic responsibility in the first place. There are many soldiers who stand up courageously against imposing odd ideas and misinterpretations of the Islamic doctrine. They know that it is a long and costly war that cannot be won by military means alone. But at the same time, in the Middle East, some Christians are waiting for the second coming of Jesus Christ to save them. Some Muslims are waiting for the re-emergence of Al-Mahdi to save them. Others are dreaming of a caliphate to be like a city on the hill to save them. I am more humble. I am much more humble. I am looking for a Muslim called Angelo Roncalli. Thank you.